Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to this evening's webinar on this lovely fine evening, brought to you by the team in Munster Bovine. And we're looking at understanding the new lifetime milk recording report. My name is Tommy Heffernan. I'm going to facilitate the discussion this evening, and I'm certainly joined by an expert panel of people, all architects, and their work and research has gone into developing this new lifetime report. So we're going to be joined this evening by Dennis Howard, technical vet with Munster Bovine, Rosario O'Connor, Munster Bovine milk recording field manager. And we're going to have a panel discussion with Dr. Doreen Corridan, recently appointed CEO to Munster Bovine, having previously held the role of technical manager with Munster Bovine. We're also joined by Dr. Patrick Kelly, project manager in Munster Bovine, and Dr. Joe Patton, head of dairy knowledge transfer in Teagasc. And we'll be joined at the end for the last closing remarks by Mary O'Keefe, herd management manager with Munster Bovine. Okay, so I suppose just to get started this evening, I've been dealing with milk records for a long time in my own career, investigating problems on farms, and I describe them as a treasure trove of information. And the new report, I suppose, when I saw it coming out 12 months ago, the visual nature of it, the usability, I really loved it. But I'm also involved in, I suppose, management on 2 dairy farms, and I suppose where I've seen it really come into its own, working with the farm managers, seeing the visual nature of this production report, the information that's on it and the usability. So really it's a treasure trove of information. Tonight, we're going to start with a presentation from Dennis Howard and Rosario O'Connor, where they're going to look at, I suppose, how this new lifetime recording report came about. We're going to look at where the figures came from, and I suppose importantly the actions we can take with these as we start utilising this phenomenal data. Then we're going to be joined for a panel discussion by an expert panel. Again, all the architects of the report and people who've put their hard research work into this, Doreen Corridan, Patrick Kelly and Joe Patton. I would ask people to please submit your questions. I will try, we have a large panel and I'll try and get as many of them as we can possibly answered. So at the bottom of your screens, there's a question and answer box. You can ask questions throughout the presentation and during the panel discussion as well. I suppose at the very start, when I was asked to facilitate the discussion, it was very clear that the objective was about understanding this report so we can get as much value as we can, because that value turns into more profitable herds, healthier herds. So it's really, I suppose, the return on investment from this, just utilising this data. Like every webinar, look, if we encounter technical difficulties, we have plenty, we have another co-host ready to go. So bear with us. These webinars tend to be the gift to keep on giving even after 18 months. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speakers, and I'm going to hand over to Rosario O'Connor, who's going to really, I suppose, start off by the why and the how of this new milk recording report. So over to you, Rosario.
Thanks very much. So when we looked at developing this report, we wanted to do it in such a way that it would be easy for farmers to analyse their milk recording data on production, irrespective of what kind of a production system they had. That was the object of the report. And when we looked at it objectively, up to now we had been looking at the current lactation of the cow. But with this report, we're now looking at the lifetime. It gives us a different view of the cow. And the really revolutionary part of this report is that it allows us to take the dry period into account, because we're taking a lifetime view of the cow. And in essence, what we're doing with the milk recording margin per day is we're distilling all your milk recording data down into one figure. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to fairly and accurately rank the cows in your herd based on production. And the real gem of this report is it doesn't matter what sort of a production system you have. It doesn't matter what sort of a calving pattern you have. Irrespective of all of that, we can fairly and accurately rank the cows in your herd based on production. So on the first page of the report, we have the production summary, and that gives a summary of your last milk recording. But what it also does is it compares your herd to the top 20% of herds that have been milk recorded in the last fortnight for each trait. The other thing that we've done is we've calculated the percentage of your cows that have a cell count greater than 200,000. And we also show you where you stand versus the top 20% of herds that have been milk recorded in the last fortnight on cell count. So how do we calculate the milk recorded lifetime margin per day? Well, what we do is we take the total value of the milk, that's the total cost divided by the total number of days. So to calculate the total milk value, we take we calculate the milk value for all valid lactations and we combine all the lactations together. We do this using the A plus B minus C. We're taking 30.5 cents a litre and we take into account the cost of production. So to be included in the lifetime milk recording report, a cow must have a valid lactation. And a valid lactation, she has to have a minimum of 3 tests and a dry off period. So that's how we get the milk value. So when we looked at the cost then, we have 2 sorts of costs. We have costs from the cow's milking and we have costs for the dry period. So the days in milk cost is made up, it depends on the production level of the herd and also the month of calving. But we have across the board figure for the dry period, it's €2 per day for the dry period. So then when we look at the total days, and this is the revolutionary part of the report, because we're taking the total days in milk, but we're also taking the total days dry, since the cow first calved, for valid lactations. So that's where we get the total days. So we calculate the lifetime margin per day. It's the total value of the milk minus the total cost divided by the total number of days. So when we look at developing the cost, we talked to Joe Patton and he was very helpful, and we've used Joe's research on this. So what we've done is we've divided herds into 4 cost categories, and there's different costs associated with each different category. And then there's also different costs depending on the month of calving. So February is the cheapest month to produce milk and August is the most expensive month. So we have there the costs for the year. So what we've done then is we've broken down those costs into a per day cost. And the reason we had to break them down into a per day cost is because if you wanted to compare cows across lactations, you couldn't look at it as, for the whole year, because you couldn't compare an 8th lactation cow to a 3rd lactation cow. So the reason we have it done as per day is so you can compare cows across lactations. So we're going to look now at the body of the report. So this is what the report actually looks like. So we were conscious that we just wanted 1 line per cow, because previous to this, we had 3 lines per cow and people found that confusing. So we were limited to 1 line per cow, and we wanted to put as much information into the page as possible to give you all the information that you need to analyze your cows. So not only did we want to give you the margin per day, but we wanted to give you the ability to analyze the margin per day. So what we've done, we've divided it into different sections. So in the first section, we look at the details of the cow. So the cows are ranked in jumbo number order. So that's because if you're looking for a cow, you want to be able to find her. So next thing, we have the name of the cow. Now, if the cow is non-pedigree, we have the breed fraction. And this is very useful if you're looking at analysing a cow, depending on the, if you're looking at analysing a cow, you have the dam details to do that. So next we have the sire, the calving date, and the lactation number, and the days in milk for the current lactation. So the next 2 columns then are very interesting because they're the EBI. But what we've done with the EBI is we've broken it down into production and fertility subindex. Now this is a production report and we're measuring production. So the production subindex is very important. And the fertility subindex is important too because it comes into calving date and it also affects dry off dates. So being able to analyze your genetics at the same time as you're analysing your top 20% and your bottom 20% in the herd is very, very useful. So the next section of the report then gives you your test day information. So this is what the cow produced on the date of the record. So what we have is the kgs of milk, the percentage fat, the percentage protein, the kgs of fat and protein, the lactose, very important figure at certain times of the year. And we also give you the cell count. So this is the cell count that the cow produced on the date of the recording. Now, the next section then is year to date. So this column, this next section, was actually suggested to us by a farmer. We did a lot of consultation with farmers when we were developing, particularly this page of the report. And a farmer suggested this so that you could see the lactation status of your cow. You know what she did in the last milk recording, but you can see how she's been performing to date. So you can see that the first cow there, her Laura cell count was 49. She's in green, which means she's never been over 200,000 in the current lactation. This is very, very useful to be able to get it at a glance, because previous to this, people would have to go to the back pages to see how the cow had been performing to date. So when we're talking about year to date, what we're talking about is we're talking about calculating milk yield and fat and protein for the cow from the date of calving to the date of the recording. That's what we mean by year to date. And when we're calculating year to date, we use lactation curves. So there are over 2,000 lactation curves, and the curve a cow is put on depends on the production level of the herd, the lactation number. Lactation number is very important in lactation curves, and the month of calving. So, for example, there, if a cow does her first milk recording at 100 days, we know that that milk wasn't produced in a straight line. So we take what's on the top of the curve into account when we're calculating the year to date for the cow. And that means that we can accurately calculate milk yields for cows with 4 tests. So all this information so far that I've talked about, bar breaking down the EBI into production and fertility subindex, was available up to now. The new part of the report is the milk recorded lifetime. So what we're showing the milk recorded lifetime is we're showing the lifetime kgs of fat and protein. Now this figure was available and was not readily available up to now. The average days dry per lactation. So that's the average number of days that the cow was dry per lactation. That figure hasn't been calculated up to now, and so wasn't available, but it's a very useful figure. Because if you're looking at dry periods and analysing dry periods, you can compare cows very easily across lactations. Then we have the total days, which is the total days in milk plus the dry days, and that gives you the total days since the cow first calved. And that allows us to calculate the milk recorded margin per day. So how we show this then is we're showing the top 20% in green and the bottom 20% in red, and the middle 60% is black. And this was done based on farmer feedback. Farmers said to us, we want to see our bottom 20% and our top 20%. So the margin per day then allows us to rank the cows within your herd. So the cows are ranked within your herd based on margin per day. So we looked at that, and it was very good, a very good way of analysing cows. But what we found was that there were cows that would have a very good lifetime, but the current lactation, the cow may not be producing so well in the current lactation. So to take that into account, what we've done is on the year-to-date milk value column, we're highlighting the bottom 20% of cows based on the margin per day, but it's only in the current lactation. So we calculate the margin per day for the current lactation only, and we're showing you the bottom 20%. So if, for example, if you had an older cow that has a very good lifetime, but in the current lactation, she's going backwards, you can see that. Or if you had a cow that was doing well and something happened to her for whatever reason, it could be a hard calving or whatever, and she's gone back. So it's just to show you cows that are going back. Now, the other side of it is you have a cow that's in the red in the year to date, and she's the red in the lifetime. She's not going to improve. She's not going to come out of the red anytime soon. But I think the best way to see this really is to get your milk recording report, find 2 cows with similar days, and one in red and one in green, and compare the 2 cows. And every herd has these cows. And I really find when I go through these reports with farmers that it's the easiest way to see the difference and what we're talking about when we talk about margin per day. So we have 2 cows here. They're both in their 6th lactation, and they both have about 2,000 days in milk. They calve down 17 days apart. One of them is ranked 5th in the herd, and one of them is ranked 230th in the herd. So one of them has a margin, the green cow has a margin of 341, the red cow has a margin of 102. But if you look at their lifetime fat and protein kgs, there is a phenomenal difference between these 2 cows. There's 1,042 kgs of a difference between these 2 cows on lifetime fat and protein kgs, which is massive. And when you translate that into money, that translates into €4,749 for the 6 lactations. So that is, in essence, when we measure margin, we are actually measuring profit because we've taken the costs into account. So one cow has made €4,749 more than another cow. That is a phenomenal difference. It's nearly €800 per lactation. It's massive. So we have established that we have 2 cows with a phenomenal difference. Now we try and establish why they have such a difference. So this is where it really gets interesting. When you look at the average days dry per lactation, you can see that one cow had 65 days dry and the other cow had 98. So one cow, the red cow, was dry 33 days per lactation longer than the other cow. If you go over then and you look at the production subindex, you can see that the cow that's in red has a production subindex of -19, while the cow that's in green has a production subindex of 67. So I mean, the production subindex is translating out into kgs of fat and protein. The other interesting thing though is if you look at the fertility subindex, the cow in green has a fertility subindex of 80, where the cow in red has a fertility subindex of 54. Now, if you look at the calving dates of those two cows, now remember, they only calved 17 days apart when they were first lactation. But now the cow that's in green is calving on the 14th of February, where the cow that's in red is calving the 17th of April. And now there is 62 days between the two cows. So that easily explains where we're getting the difference. So I would really urge you to look at your milk recording report, find two cows with similar days and compare them. And I think it's the best way of really getting your head around the milk recording lifetime margin per day. So now I'm going to hand you back to Tommy.
Thank you, Rosario. That was excellent. A couple of things I picked up on there, obviously, was the consultation with farmers to help them make the decisions and feed into the report. And again, each line of the report, each cow, there's so much data in it. Just to remind people, this webinar has been recorded. So if you joined us a little bit late, it'll be available, the whole webinar and the discussion afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Dennis Howard, who's going to, I suppose, look in more detail at the report and some of the actions we can take with all this data.
Thanks very much, Tommy. So I suppose Rosario is after doing a great job there, going through the why, so why this new report came about and how the calculations, and she really gave a great insight into how the figures are calculated and the value they are, and what an excellent way they are of actually ranking cows, fair and accurate way of ranking cows. So I suppose I'm going to go through some actions and maybe look at some of these cows and what kind of decisions you can make around them on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to look at some cows here now. So as Rosario said, it's very easy to find cows in this report. They're ranked there, or they're in order of jumbo, so they're very easy found. So if we look at this cow without looking at any data, like there's a lot of data on this page, without looking at any data, you can tell a lot already. You can tell this cow, she's performing well, she's ranked 45 in a large herd, she's a good margin per day, and she's in green in her cell count, so she has no test over 200 this year. So she's a very solid performer. If you look at her calving date, she's calving February 6th lactation cow, you know, spending about 2 months dry per lactation. So the ideal cow really, and performing very well. If we move down along, there's even a better cow down here. She's ranked 2nd in the herd. So a very high margin per day there of 397. And that equates to about 1,500 euros of profit per lactation. Again, she's 6th lactation, a very good EBI, very good production sub-index. Production is very good. Unfortunately for this cow, she's in red, a very high cell count. So she's the one despite her production, she's the one that we need to watch and what decision we're going to make as we get closer to dry off. Cow below her then, she's in red. So this is the first cow now we've come across that's in red for her lifetime production. So with a margin there of 159, which gives her a profit of about 600 euros per lactation. So she's still making a profit. If you look back along at her, you know, her EBI, she's actually minus in her production sub-index. She's calving a bit later at the end of March, which gives her more days dry per lactation. So her non-productive days are greater than the cow above her. And if you look at the difference in production of the two cows, again, you know, about 1,000 kilos of milk solids of a difference between the two cows. So a big difference. But still, you know, she's doing okay. Then we come down to the bottom here and we see some cows here now with what you might call double red cards. So they're in red for their lifetime production and they're in red for their year-to-date production. So I suppose if you do have the opportunity maybe to sell some of your poorer cows, these are the cows you're starting to look at, these cows that are have a double red card, so they're red in their lifetime, they're red in their year-to-date production. And if you look at that one there, 124, that equates to about 450 euros of profit per lactation. So still not doing too badly. These ladies are starting to drop off a bit, down less than 400 euros of profit per lactation. And if you look at the reasons again, you know, genetics plays their part in some of them. And certainly the poorer ones there, it's days in milk again. You know, they're slipped out to April with calving. Their non-productive days, so their average days dry has increased up 3 to 4 months. And then there's a cow, Rosarie. She alluded to these cows at the bottom. So she's been doing okay on her lifetime so far. She slipped into red this year. So, you know, and the herd owner themselves will often know the reason for this. Actually, it could be a calving difficulty or some health event during the spring or whatever. But there's often a reason behind cows that were performing okay, slipping back. So, and I suppose what decision around these cows? Well, the big decision, they're all, you know, have varying degrees of profitability. But the big thing is when it comes to the breeding season is actually to avoid breeding off the red cows. So if you have the opportunity to be a bit selective about your breeding, these are the cows to avoid breeding off, these cows that are in red, and especially the ones with the double red cards. And if you can avoid them, they're going to accelerate your genetic gain for the young stock you're bringing in. So then, if we look at the second lactation cow performance report, so there's a separate report for the second and the first lactations. And the reason for this is obviously first and second lactations, they produce less. So if they were lumped in with all the cows, they would rank very poorly. So which didn't make sense. So they actually have their own report. And generally, you're not going to be looking at selling young cows. You're going to try and retain them if you can. But we can learn from them and see why are the green ones green and why are the red ones red. And a lot of the reasons often go back to genetics again, you know, maybe an imbalance in the EBI, either low EBI or an imbalance. And you'll often see red, especially in high EBI herds, you'll often see red heifers and red second calvers that have a poor production subindex. So there's learnings to be got there to try and maybe, you know, match those cows to better bulls to try and even up their EBI. And the other, I suppose, the other learning is what some of these red animals, some of these red cows, they may have been sick as calves. So they might have had pneumonia, they might have had scour. So, you know, maybe it is going all the way back to the calf house by some of these heifers that have a good EBI are actually performing poorly. Another thing to watch out with the second lactations is their average days dry. So the first lactation animal, they generally need a good long dry period to recover from that first lactation. And you'll often see if they don't get it, it can actually affect their production in the second lactation. So that's something to watch out for. The first lactation cow performance report then, similar to the last one, it's really what you can learn. We're not going to be selling your heifers unless there's something drastically wrong. But you can certainly learn why are the good ones good and why are the bad ones bad, or why are the poorer ones poor. And often you're looking at genetics again, you're trying to learn from that. You're looking back to the calf house or any health events to see why is a poor one performing poorly. And generally as well, for those first and second lactation animals, the big decision there is if you can be a bit selective about your breeding to avoid breeding off the bottom 20%. So avoid breeding off the red ones. And again, you're going to accelerate your genetic gain if you can just avoid breeding off the bottom 20%. So then we look at these margin per day churns. So we're back to the first page of the report, and there's a reason we're doing it this way. And I suppose we wanted to explain the margin per day and go through that before we actually looked at these churns. So the first thing to say about the churns is this is where you'll find the cost of production category which Rosarie referred to earlier on. So you can see this herd here, it is in the 7,000 to 9,000 kilo category. And then it's going to show the average, the top 20% and the bottom 20% in the churns. And that green churn is always filled to capacity. So this is always going to be full, and it's the drop off then down to the average and down to the bottom 20%. It's really what it's giving you is a visual representation of the production in the herd and how much of a difference there is between the bottom 20% and the top 20%. And these figures, they're unique to your herd. So they're not for comparing with another herd. They're unique to your herd, and they're a way of ranking the cows in your herd. And every herd has a top 20% and the bottom 20%. No matter how good or bad the herd is, it has a top 20% and the bottom 20%. And it's all about helping you make better decisions to actually improve the performance in your herd. So like if this herd owner here, if the production was 7,100 kilos, he's going to be in the high production category. If his neighbour is at 6,900, he's going to be in the lower production category. So one is 1,750 for a February calving cow, the other is 1,350 for a February calving cow. So these figures are not for comparing, but they're an excellent way of ranking and actually analysing the production in your herd. So we'll move on then and have a look at SCC, and there's a lot of you know, obviously a lot of the report is dedicated to SCC. It's a very important part of milk recording is actually controlling SCC, particularly with the legislation coming down the road. And the other thing is, if it's not under control, you won't have the chance to make use of the rest of the report, and maybe selling the poorer cows or you know, or pot cows to retain. So I call this the Scc Dashboard. And what it does is it compares the current recording to the previous recording. So if it's the first recording in the year, it's really analysing your dry period. And these red cows are the cows that didn't cure over the dry period. The orange ones are going to be the new infections over the dry period. And the blue ones are the cows that cured over the dry period. So it's a great way of analysing your dry period performance. During the year then, which this one is here, it's actually just seeing how things are going. Are things improving or disapproving or staying the same regards SCC? And you can see in this herd here, they're disimproving. The new infection rate has gone up, so there's more recent infections, these orange cows, which requires a bit of further investigation. So then if you go down to the bottom of the report, then the high SCC cows, they're divided into persistently infected and recently infected. So persistently infected are cows that the last two milk recordings have been over 200,000. And what this report here gives you really is the history of these cows. And history is so important because the longer a cow has an infection, the harder she is to cure. So if we look at an example here, there's great information there in that top bit of text. If we look at this cow, 565, she's a 13th lactation cow. And if you look, she's running at about 500,000. Previous lactation, she was the same, her average was the same. She didn't cure over the dry period, and she's, you know, she didn't cure, and she's staying like that. So she's not desperately high, I suppose. It's only contributing 2% to the bull tank, but what she is a real source of infection for other cows in the herd, particularly young cows. And a great option here might have been to dry off a quarter when the herd owner realised that she didn't cure in the spring, to actually dry off the quarter. The recently infected cows then, as the name suggests, they've just gone high in the current milk recording. And really, what's a great thing to do is get out your California mastitis test and test these cows. Whenever you get your results back about a week after the recording, go through these cows and test them. And the thing about these is they've picked up the infection recently, which means you've a great chance of curing them. So it's well worth, if you can find a quarter, going after it, treating it. And they're also great cows to take samples for cultural sensitivity and build up a bank of information. So if we look at this cow here, first lactation, she's started off perfectly. She went high. If you can find a quarter in her, she's well worth going after and treating because you have a great chance of a cure. These recently cured cows then, they're important because, especially if you're after treating cows, you want to see how they responded, and response to treatment is very important to see is your actual treatments working? Are you treating the right cows? If we look at this cow here, she was high last year, a bit like the red cow we looked at earlier on. Didn't cure over the dry period. In fact, she got much worse. She got really bad. And if I was betting, I'd say she maybe got a quarter dried off here after the recording in May, and she dropped right back down under 200,000. So then we're after covering a good bit of ground there from Rosario, going through how the margin per day is calculated, the actions maybe, and what to do with those cows down along. So we're heading for the 1st of September now. We're heading into the last third of lactation. What are the actions we can do at the moment? So we start off with SCC, and the first thing, and the most important thing for me, is actually to protect the clean cows from now until dry off. So obviously your teat spraying, your parlour, your parlour routine. But a big thing is actually using the milk recording to identify those high cows and taking some measures to make sure they're not spreading it. So whether it's dry off a quarter or whether it's cluster dipping after you milk them, but to try and stop the spread from those high cows. Next one then is identify these high cows for culling. So if they can't be cured, so particularly those ones that haven't cured at the previous dry period, they have a very bad history, they're not going to cure, and we need to start thinking about moving them on, and maybe it's time to maybe start feeding them or start thinking about moving them on sooner rather than later. The next one then is identifying cows for a long dry period. So some of these will be recently infected, or some of them will be persistently infected, but their history is not too bad. They have a good chance of curing over the dry period, and the best chance you'll have of curing these cows is to give them a long dry period, the bones at 3 months, and combine it with a long-acting dry cow antibiotic to give them the best chance of cure. So it's time to start maybe identifying some of those cows and think about drying them off early. And then, as I mentioned previously, it's a great time of year now as well to build up a bank of data. So CMT some of those high cows, take good samples and actually build up a bank of information for yourself and your vet to look at when you're deciding on what dry cow treatment to prescribe. And then looking at the cows to retain in the herd, so the culling decisions. The first thing is this is production now, not SCC. So is there a chance or is there an opportunity for voluntary culling? So if you've had a good year fertility, you don't have too many empty cows, SCC is under control, you don't have too many lame cows, you might have a chance to move on some of the poorer cows. And if you do, this report is really a fantastic tool to decide which cows to move on. So like we said before, we're looking for the double reds. If they have 3 reds, it means they're poor production and they're cell count trouble. But the double reds, then they're the ones that are actually performing the poorest. And look at the margin per day. And if you can, as we mentioned this churn before, if you look at this herd here, you know, a very low margin per day. So those cows, those red cows are barely covering their costs of production. So if you can move some of them on and replace them with better, higher genetic merit animals, you can really fill up that churn and really lift the production in the herd. And then I suppose breeding decisions, you'll wonder, the breeding season isn't that long over and we're talking about breeding again, but we can really, I suppose we can learn from what's gone by. And if you look at it, the first lactation, the second lactation animals, the breeding decisions we made 3 or 4 years ago, how are they panning out? And what can we learn from them as regards the choice of bulls to put on individual cows? And the big thing then is to look at this, it's a rolling report, so to look at the bottom 20%, the red cows, as cows to not breed from. So if you're breeding your maiden heifers, maybe you're using the sex semen and you have a chance to be selective. This report is really a great tool to make that decision to not breed certain cows. So the last slide then, Tommy, so just to mention the annual report, and in fairness, this new lifetime report, it's like a rolling annual report because it's taken the whole lifetime performance into account. But the actual annual report then, there's a bit more in there as regards the individual cow, and it looks at the monthly calving, it analyses the monthly calving and the margin per lactation. And then we have the Farm Ops app, of course, and one of the brilliant module in the Farm Ops app is actually the milk recording. And in there, the SCC in production, and it's really done extremely well in there. There's some lovely features. A lot of that analysis that we spoke about is done, and you know, even help with nutrition and analysing different lactation groups. And you can filter and sort to your heart's content. So you can put all the red cows together and look at them, even for different lactations. And then we have the dry off plan. This is another module in the app, and I suppose it does a really nice job of, it creates a dry off plan using the monthly calving. We spoke about giving cows a long dry period, a long acting tube. It'll actually do that. If you're doing selective dry cow therapy, it'll bring you through the criteria, the herd criteria, to help decide, is the herd actually suitable? And then it'll actually automatically pick out the cows. And a lovely feature in there as well is if you're recording your cases of mastitis, it'll use that in the dry off plan as well. So if a cow with a case of mastitis, she won't be selected for selective dry cow therapy. And if she's after a couple of cases, she'll get a long dry period and a long acting tube. So that's it from me, Tommy.
Excellent, great presentation, Dennis. And the questions are coming in, which is fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to welcome Rosarie and Dennis back and ask our expert panel to join us as well now as we dig into the detail and ask some questions here with the objective of, I suppose, this understanding this lifetime milk recording report. So even with the questions that have come in here, there's a sort of pattern around them. And I think we might try and some of the questions are similar. So there's a lot of questions on the cost. There's SCC questions, report-based questions, and then on actions as well. Okay, so we have the full panel there. So I suppose, Doreen, I'm going to bring you in first. First of all, congratulations on your new role. As somebody who knows you a long time, it's hard to find anyone as passionate and knowledgeable and as enthusiastic about farming and Irish agriculture. So the best of luck in your role. But I suppose I'll ask you maybe to summarise some of the key points there. There's been a lot of ground covered, but some of the key points from a farming perspective, as a farmer, what are the key things I need to take from that presentation?
Thank you, Tommy. I suppose the first thing is this is absolutely a superb report, and it's really coming at a very opportune time, because what we have is the genetics, the age of the cow, her calving date, her yield to date, and her lifetime in SCC, all in the one page. And this is going to be key to enable herd owners to deliver on the commitments that is made to the sustainability agenda. And if we look what is required, it's all about these long life, productive, profitable cows coming from a mature herd, producing kilos of milk solids as much as possible from grass, and cows that are resource efficient, require less antibiotics, less labour, less N and less P. And the great thing about this report is we can easily identify these productive and profitable cows on a one page that's colour coded. And it really identifies for us the cows that we really need to retain and value. And it also identifies the cows that we need to replace. And we need to replace those cows with heifers from cows that have performed well and that are from high genetic merit. And Dennis there, in one of his final slides, he outlined some of the cows there, that we should not be retaining. And one thing that's really worthwhile doing is look at your cows that you were considering not retaining. Then look at your first calvers and how they performed. And just say to yourself, if I had more of those first calvers instead of those cows that haven't performing, would I be better off? I think this is key, but I think, it's a key report, Tommy, coming just at a very opportune time.
Okay, great summary, Doreen. Okay, so the questions are coming in, and I suppose it's a big panel, so I'm gonna pick on people a little bit just for a bit of structure, but I'm sure it's not a shy panel either, so don't be afraid to give an opinion if you disagree. Joe Patton, welcome to you this evening. How are you? We're going to start with you. There's questions in here on costs, Joe, and I know you've done a lot of research in this area. And I'm going to read out one of the questions because it's an interesting one. You displayed the costs in the presentation that you had per month of production. I don't understand how costs would be higher during summer months than, say, the costs for the month of February. So I suppose the key question is, how are the costs calculated or derived, Joe?
Good evening, Tommy. Yeah, I suppose maybe just to clarify that, I'd say the costs that were presented there on the screen were per month of calving rather than per month of production. So if the higher cost, if you like, in the summer months reflects the cost of a cow calving in the summer rather than a cow milking in the summer, if you know what I mean. So generally speaking, we've seen this over the years that no matter what model you look at and no matter which financial model you choose to run it through, the cost of February calving obviously is cheaper than is the cheapest month, and that increases steadily until you get to July, August being the most expensive months of calving, and then back down again obviously as you go through into November, December, and back around to January. So really, what the cost in the background of the report does is it weights the month of calving for the cow to reflect the fact that, you know, a February calved cow can produce 500 kilos of milk solids cheaper than a July calving cow, for example, right? So sometimes it can be a bit misleading if we only look at 305-day milk solids yield, because it really depends on how that's derived even within the herd. So I know, Dennis, you made the point that you can't really compare across herds here. Because you're going to have different cost structures, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a within herd report. And I suppose the main function for that cost per month there is trying to reflect the calving date of the cows within the herd and try and put some balance on that, you know.
I think that's an important point as well, Joe, that there's no better way to raise a row and talk about systems and the best system or anything like that. But this report is very much your farm system. Yeah. It's and just there is a question on that, and I think it's kind of relevant, is the different costs between groups, how that works as well, how that was costed out, and maybe explain that difference to people, that this information is your system and your herd, your data.
So I suppose what we would it's banding of the different systems. So essentially we've modeled this over a long number of years within Teagasc, looking at the different costs. So essentially really the main driver of that is the feed budget cost, Tommy. So if you take a cow that calves down, essentially the milk production curve will vary slightly with month of calving, But the big thing that changes is the feed budget. So obviously, if you've got 17, 18 kilograms of good quality grass to offer a cow in April, and she's coming towards peak, that's a cheaper cow to feed than a cow that's calving in, let's say, July, August, where you have to prop the cow up at peak coming as grass quality starts to decline from this time of the year onward. So the main driver there is the difference in feed cost, okay? But you also will have a difference then depending on the yield category. So as we know, we try to maximize the amount of production from grass, but grass can go so far, and then after that there will be an inevitable additional concentrate depending on the milk milk production. So I was just looking actually this morning at some of the data we'd have from Moore Park actually, and with similar genetics cows based on a sort of a higher input system versus a grass-based system, there could be anything up to maybe 100 kilos of milk solids different for identical genetics for milk production. But the difference there is really driven by concentrate input. So we have to reflect that when we're doing the yields or we're doing the yield categories. But I suppose the main thing to remember is that when we are looking at it, it is a within herd comparison. So that's the important point. We probably don't want people starting to say, you know, this is a way to sort of define the optimal system of production. That's not what it's about. It's really about comparing the cows within your own herd.
Yeah, absolutely. We won't get into that big debate.
No,
tonight,
please,
Joe.
please don't. It's already 20 to 9.
Yeah. So, no, Joe, I think the key thing is there, and I think we have to respect as well and give credit for the huge amount of research that's gone into these figures and to have them displayed in a way, and I've seen it on farm, that's so visually easy to interpret and make this good decisions on. Just again, maybe I might go to you, Patrick, on this one. It's an important one again, but just to clarify, it was clarified there, but how is the margin per day calculated again? Just give us a quick summary on that. And good evening to you as well. You're just on mute, Patrick, there.
All right, Tommy. I suppose it's I think it's a simple calculation, but people say to me it's simple for me because I've done it enough times. But it's the total value of the milk. So you take the valid lactations into account, but it's the total value of the milk that the cow produced, less the costs that were associated with producing that and the dry days divided by her total number of days. So it really gives you a representation of what she's done per day, and you can multiply that back up if you want by the number of days she has to see the total value that she's left you on the farm.
Okay, excellent. Just as another question in here, Patrick, it's probably relevant as well when I have you, is the €2 per day for the dry period. How was that calculated? There
was different figures. I know we discussed it with Joe and different organisations just to check it. There's different ones. It's varying between €2 and €3, but we went with the €2 because we said it seemed like the most balanced one to go. And Joe was online with us with that, which is great to have Joe give us the figures. And then we said it was easy for people to understand it, and it was easy then to calculate it out. And I suppose it just made a very easy calculation around it. So it was through research side, and then we kept it at 2 to make it easy for everyone to balance.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, there's questions coming in. I'll try and I suppose some are similar in subject. Rosario, if I can bring you in on a question on here, if I haven't submitted dry off dates, what impact will this have on the results of the report? So how important are these dry off dates you mentioned?
Dry off dates are very important. So if you don't dry off the cows if you don't dry off a cow before she calves again, the next lactation can't start until you finish the last lactation. So the computer will automatically dry off the cow a month after last milk recording. Now, when you had your last milk recording, then really becomes critical, because herds that are recording 6 times a year, you probably will be fairly accurate with your dry off date. So the more often you're recording, the better the chances your dry off dates will be correct. But what we do is we dry the cow off a month after your last milk recording.
Okay, there's also a question. You mentioned a valid lactation. Can you explain what that is? Just a valid lactation, just while I have you.
This is milk recorded lifetime. So we're only taking milk recorded lactations into account. And in order for milk recorded lactation to be included in the calculations, the cow has to have 3 tests and a dry off period. And like I say, it's only milk recorded lactations that are taken into account. So if you buy in a cow and she wasn't recorded when you bought her in, those lactations that she had off your farm will not be included.
Okay. Again, there's a lot of questions with a similar team. So if we don't get to every question this evening, formal complaints, letters in writing to Munster Bovine about the facilitator, but I'll try and get as many of them as I can. Just, I suppose, maybe this is one for you, Patrick. Once a day now and wasn't previously, what impact will this have on the results of the report?
So if you're once a day milking now and you only started with a year or two versus twice a day before that, the yields will be slightly higher on the cows that would be coming from the twice a day. So on the ranking, they can rank higher. So animals that are now coming in the once a day system can rank lower. So it's just something to be aware of if you are transitioning from a twice a day system to a once a day system, that it will take time for those to balance out. But it does balance out over time as the twice a day yields are moving out of the system. But it does take time, Tommy, because there's obviously more milk in for the cows that are on twice a day versus the once a day.
Okay,
so they'll have more value.
There's another question just on the dry off date for clarification. If you dry the cow off on the ICBF website, will it take that date into account? And I think the answer is yes, but maybe confirm that, Rosaria.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, absolutely right, brilliant. Cost of rearing a heifer against a cow, because it's not in there currently. Why is that?
I suppose we decided, Tommy, to look at that, to not include the cost of rearing a heifer, because I suppose we didn't want minuses starting off the year for our farmers. So if you've got a heifer starting off, you didn't want a big minus attached to her. And it'd be very hard to see which ones were making a better value for you than if there was minuses in present. I suppose it's very easy if you do look at it. You can see the value of the heifer's leaving you, can see the value of second calver's leaving you, and it's very easy to see how she paid it back. If you take the 1,500, just as round figure, and you look that if she's leaving you €1 per day, it's going to take her 1,500 days to do it. If she's leaving you €3 a day, she'll have done it in 500 days. So you can see it by using the figures when they've paid off their rearing and when they're starting making money for you. But we didn't want that big minus at the start for an animal, because we just thought no one really needs to see minuses at the start of it. You want to see how they're doing, but you can easily extrapolate it out. And you can see that even Dennis had heard there earlier, and you could see that there was some animals leaving, we'll say in the jars, there was some animals leaving less than €1. So it was going to take them and maybe into their third and they're heading at fourth before they start paying off, because other ones were finished at the start of the second lactation.
Okay. What happens with a cow when she goes to 400, maybe longer days in milk? Does that affect the report? Anyone want to take that question?
Well, it's taken into account in the report, because if a cow milks for 500 days, she gets the value of that milk, but we also have a cost against her for those days. Yeah. So if her production is high enough, she'll cover the cost, and if it's not, she won't. It's actually a very, very, very good way of accurately measuring to see, is it paying you to milk on those cows? If they'll cover their cost of production, that will show up. If they don't, they'll go into the red.
Just while I have you there, Rosario, you mentioned it, I thought it was very interesting, that there was a lot of farmer feedback into the layout of the report and the usability.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about that? What were the key things that were wanted? Because there is feedback on the report, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there was 2 levels. So first of all, when we started calculating the margin per day, we gave it to farmers, and it was very basic. It was on Excel sheets. And, we met farmers and we went through it, and it correlated with them. I have yet to meet a farmer that doesn't agree with us on the bottom 20% of the cows. They know why they're bottom 20%. And not only do they know them, they know why they're the bottom 20%. And the other interesting thing was, we talked to farmers, their top 20% though, there would be cows that we would pick out in the top 20% that the farmers really wouldn't rate that highly, because they're cows that perform consistently year in, year out, and they are highlighted in the top 20% in the report. So we had farmer feedback from that point of view, which was very encouraging. And then when it came to the layout of the pages, the farmer feedback was absolutely critical in that. We had the design done, we had the pages laid out, we had it all done. And the farmer suggested that we put in colour code the lactation and the cell count. We had to change all the layouts and everything, but it was well worth it. It was fantastic feedback, because what the farmer said to me is, I can get it all now on the one page if I can see how the cell count is performing through the year. So farmer feedback was absolutely critical to developing the report.
one of the things when you look at the report is you could have a red card during a lactation and a milk recording report, but still have a very high margin per day. Does anyone want to take on that and why that might happen? I've just seen it myself from looking at a report.
I can do that. So if you have a cow that, I suppose you have two different cows, it's a bit like what Rosario said there. If you've got a cow milking on and she's milking for a long time, her overall value for that lactation could be quite high. But if you take the costs associated with producing that milk, she mightn't actually be leaving you a huge return. Whereas if you take a different cow, she mightn't be milking as long, but what she's been doing is of more value per day versus the cow that's been milking a long time. You can see this in some of the carryover cows that have gone on probably longer than their ability to milk, and they're starting to decrease their value, so they start going into the raid, and that's really what it's showing you. And it's a great indication to show you that some of the cows can milk on, but some cows can't, as Rosario said, and if they can't, they'll go into the raid. So you could look and you could see a cow's 2,000 on the current lactation value, but then another cow could be 900 and 2,000 in the raid. But that's why it is, because it's the value per day that she's leaving you on that milk, not just the overall value.
Okay, good answer, Patrick. Just somebody has asked, can I watch the start of the meeting again? You can. This meeting is recorded, so the whole thing can be viewed back and will be sent out to anyone who's registered for the event. Two similar questions here around increased frequency of milk recording, or how often should we milk recording? Does that affect the accuracy of the report? So if we're looking at optimal timing of milk recordings, does anyone want to come out with an optimal number, minimum number, and optimal number?
I think if we look at a minimum number, Tommy, we'd really be looking at 4.
Okay.
If we're looking at an optimum number in spring calving herd, we'd probably be talking 6. Because if you look at it from a cell count point of view, the first thing now, especially with AMR and selective dry cow getting more important, we need to work out how did the dry period go. So we do need to do a milk recording within 30 days of calving to get the first lot of cows. Then we need to repeat that within 30 days again. You know what I mean? So that's kind of tying up our March and April and May one. And then at the back end, before we dry off, we'd need a milk recording. And if we were doing 2 dry offs, I mean, that'll take 2 out. So we'd need another 2 then in the actual centre to really get a handle on both production and on SCC.
Okay.
So, Dor, just to clear that, Tommy, that's Doreen, you saying that you need to record 6 times, so each cow gets a minimum 4 times. It's it's 6 times. You probably need to do 6 or 7. You need to milk record on at least 6 or 7 occasions per year in order that the minimum number per any individual cow in the herd is 4. And that, I think that we see that a lot, actually, that people are waiting too long for their first recording so that they can have more cows calved, if you like, to catch them all. So really what you're saying is that the first recording, you nearly have to do 2 bouts of recording in order to get the timing of the first recording right for every cow, if you know what I mean. That's the point, really, is it?
That's the point, Joe. And at the back end, then when you're drying off, another 2 bouts to make sure what you're drying off. Do you know what I mean? You're drying them off correctly, and then you need 2 more in the centre.
Okay.
Sorry, Tommy, can I just come in there?
You can, sorry.
What we found last year was people left their last milk recording go very late. You need a certain level of milk in order to milk record the last test. People were letting the last milk recording go right up to the dry. Cows were nearly dry. The fats were extremely high. There was an awful lot of sediment in the milk, and we couldn't test the samples. So you have to have at least 5 kgs of milk in whatever milking that you're taking the sample, so that we can get a representative sample for the milk.
Okay.
And the other point there, Tommy, and what Barry said, is that herdowners leaving the last recording go too late. Do you know what I mean? Try and always, do you know what I mean, do a recording at least 30 days, do you know what I mean, before you're drying off your first batch. And at least in, as Rosario says, when every cow has 5 kilos, because it'll do 2 things for you. It'll those high SCC cows you need to give the long dry period to make sure they cure over the dry period. But it also will identify your low lactose cows. Do you know what I mean? You actually need to dry off at that stage to make sure your lactose actually stays up.
Okay, very good. So let's go into the SCC questions then. There's a question on milk, 2 questions on the milk turns as well. We'll come back to them. I suppose, Dennis, you mentioned drying off a quarter, practical thing to do at this time of year when people look at the reports. Talk to people about maybe best practice on drying off a quarter. You mentioned it there. It's something that always comes up time and time again.
Definitely asked for that question anyway, Tommy. I mentioned it a few times. So I suppose the first thing to say is there's probably some cows not suitable. If they're very high yield, it's probably not a practical or not a fair thing to do. But for your average cow, I think one tip that I've learned anyway is actually to start milking that quarter once every second day for a couple of terms. So I suppose by milking it once every second day, you're going to reduce the yield so that the yield is going to go down, but you're also going to milk it out a couple of times to stop the quarter going wrong or stop the quarter becoming acidic. And then maybe when you actually decide when the volume has gone down, you can dry it off with a sealer. Obviously, good hygiene there around doing that. And the other thing to note is not to put up any lactating cow tubes, because the withdrawals in all those tubes, they're determined, or I suppose, they're dependent on the cow and the milk actually being milked back out again. So don't put up any antibiotics.
Just there's two questions in relation to sort of high cell count, persistently infected cows. Replace them all, or what's the best advice there? You brought one, you highlighted one lady she's gone through 2 lactations with high cell count. What's sort of best practice around persistently infected cows? We're going to be looking at it this time of year.
I suppose the answer is, Tommy, it depends on their history. So we spoke about the history. The longer they're infected, the poorer the chance of cure, particularly cows that were high the previous lactation and didn't cure over the dry period. So those cows that are infected a long time are going to have a very poor chance of cure. Then you're going to have persistently infected cows, particularly young cows that maybe are just gone high during the summer, and they actually have a good chance of cure. So a long dry period, like Doreen said there, a long dry period, a long acting tube starts, it gives them a real chance of being cured. So the answer is it depends on their history, and the report lets you see the history.
Okay, I'm going to come back to SCC. The questions are flying in, and I'm losing track of all these questions. But we will come back to any ones that aren't answered after the webinar, and it is recorded as well. So just to remind people, I've been asked about that again. The churns, Rosari, these churns are very interesting. They're 3 simple churns. They're very visual. But can you explain to people again the top 20%, close to the bottom 20%? What should we be looking at? How should I be happy with what do I need to be looking at when I'm looking at my churns?
Well, really, what you need to focus on really is your middle churn, because every herd has the top 20% and every herd has the bottom 20%. And really, it's where is your middle churn, because that's 60% of your cows. So what you're looking for really is you're looking for your middle 60% of cows to be as close to your top 20% as possible, because that means that your production is even. So it's giving you a very good indication. Most herds, very few herds, that the bottom 20% of cows aren't half the top 20%. That's most herds. So if you've anything above half in your bottom 20%, you're doing well. But really, it's all about uniformity. The more uniform your churns are, like the aim should be to bring your top 20% up to match your middle and your top 20%. Okay,
maybe a difficult question, but if I'm going out to buy stock and I'm looking at the churns, what do I need to be looking at? If I'm allowed to look at them?
Well, if you're allowed to look at them, is right. Now, the first thing to look at is what level of production.
Okay.
If you're really, when you're going buying stock, you want to buy something that's better than what you have yourself. So the first thing you look at is what costs are in your own herd and what costs are in the herd that you're buying. That's very important, because the figure are based on the costs. So if they're on lower cost than you are, their figures might look better. So that's why we say really it's a within herd comparison. But you have to be very cognizant if you're buying in cows that you buy better than what you have yourself, and that you take into account the cost of production in the herd that you're buying from.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, look, there's a lot of questions there. I'm conscious of time as well, so I'm going to ask.
I think the other thing, Tommy, there on what Rosari said, is by all means take into account. Look at the herd donor bands you're buying from, because if you're, if a 5,000 kilo herd, you don't want to be buying from an 8,000 or 9,000 kilo herd, because those cows, they just won't perform in your herd. So that is the first thing. And as Rosari said, do not be buying off the bottom 20% of the herd anyway. but really look at the genetics. I mean, that you have a good balance between that production and that fertility index. Because genetics is key. We're seeing it the whole time in this with the production index.
Person said to me once, Doreen, genetics creates potential.
Yes.
Yeah. So, look, it's 9 o'clock. I have a couple of more questions that are coming in on SCC. I suppose they're relevant because of the time of year we're at in a lot of farms. Doreen, just while I have you, using the SCC section of the report as an accurate tool for selecting cows suitable for selective dry cow therapy. Two things just to refresh people on when we talk about selective dry cow therapy, what are we talking about? Can we use this report for this purpose of selective dry cow therapy as well?
Okay. The first thing with selective dry cow therapy, Tommy, is regardless of whether the cow is suitable or not, is the herd suitable? So the first thing I'd look at is what was the cure rate over the dry period last year? And if a herd had a poor cure rate over the dry period last year, I would not look at selective dry cow therapy, right? The second thing then is I would look at is, has the herd donor a cubical space per cow across the dry period? And they are the two really prerequisites before I'd even look at selective dry cow therapy. So basically, if a herd donor did not get a good cure rate last year, and he hadn't got, or she hadn't got a cubical space per cow, forget about selective dry cow therapy. However, if both of those are right, by all means try it. But in the first year, only do 5 to 10% of the herd. And pick your sure bets. So I mean, pick your cows that are really low all year, young cows with no teeth damage, and cows that are actually calving early. So just stack all the odds in your favour and then get your confidence the first year and work with the second year.
Okay. Joe, if I go back to you again, like we're at a time now that the information is there, it's laid out, the call to action for people from your perspective, the value of spending time analysing this report. Can you just, I suppose in your own words, you're doing this day in, day out, but like the benefits from your perspective, I know you've said it probably many times on many webinars at this stage, but just to reiterate that strong message of getting out this lifetime milk recording report and looking at the data.
It's huge, Tommy. And, you know, I suppose we're moving maybe into a slightly different phase as an industry that I suppose the rate of the pace of change in terms of cow numbers is slowing down a bit on a lot of herds. We're reaching sort of optimal stocking rates in a lot of places. This gives us an opportunity to start being a bit more selective within the herd. And I think what really stands out is the range of performance, within a herd. So there's probably cows within that herd. If you think about it, even we're using the average figures here, but you know, there's obviously some, you know, we're using the average figures for cost, but if you're pushing marginal cows into systems, for example, they may actually be creating more than the average cost. So culling your lowest cows could really have a big increase in margin. So if you use that report sensibly, it's potential that you could, you know, you certainly could drive the margin in the herd overall by taking out the least productive animals, the problem cows, the ones that are maybe putting the pressure on the cubical space per cow, as Doreen said. Like you take there, are you better would you be better with 100 cows that are all doing a great job than 110 cows, and 10 of which are making it harder on every other cow in the place? So there's a very good opportunity there to start, maybe both from a culling point of view, but also maybe as we maybe move now into people maybe be more settled in replacement rate, even if you want to hold on to some of those more middle range cows, they can be marked for high beef index bulls as well, so that you can increase the rate of change on your genetic merit on your heifers as well. So culling is one thing, and then using it to be selective on your mating decisions as well. So there's huge scope there to start improving the quality of the herd overall as we started moving into maybe a more static situation in cow numbers overall, you know.
It's very interesting you say it, you know, they're going to 110 to 100. You know, over the years, you would have seen that you know, the overall herd performance stayed the same, that these passengers are there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just actually was on the call with a chap earlier in the week who in a large scale herd culled 80 cows last year, and the bulk tank went up by 3%.
I've seen it
and that tells you a lot, like, you know, that really tells you a lot. And I think that's maybe where, you know, with that report being able to identify those few cows that are maybe eating the grass on the good ones, that's maybe what we should be thinking on, you know.
And it's the good ladies are the ones you never see. They're the invisible cows. Often said before. I suppose we now have visualizing them. Okay, I think that's very strong, Joe. On that. Okay, we have a couple of more. Maybe the big picture thinking. Doreen, I'm going to go back to you on two of these questions. Reducing antibiotic usage on farm. It's going to be another key pillar. There's lots of key pillars coming in, changes coming. But how is this report going to help in that way?
Oh, absolutely. And the one thing, Tommy, when we're talking about reducing antibiotic usage on farm, I think the first thing we have to look at is a lot of people just focus on selective dry cow therapy. I think if we're reducing antibiotic on farm, the first thing is to get to know the antibiotics. And the first thing is to get to know the critically important antibiotics. So reduce those as much as possible. As I have some herdowners, they're doing a bit of selective dry cow therapy. They think they're doing great. But then in the rest of the herd, they're using one of the critically important antibiotics in the rest of the herd. Right, so the first thing I'd say to herdowners is reduce antibiotics, get to know your antibiotics. I mean, try and avoid the critical ones. The second thing is, do not just focus on the selective dry cow, the cows, focus on the calves. There's an awful lot of antibiotics, especially the critical ones, are used on calf pneumonia and calf scab. Right, and when we're looking at this report, as Dennis said earlier, a lot of the poor performers may be back to issues at the calf. Because if you take David Clifford and his performance next Sunday, hopefully, he definitely won't have got scoured or pneumonia, I mean, as a child, you know. So we have to take that into account as well. You know what I mean? And the other piece then with the antibiotics is on the cows. The vast majority of antibiotics we use in the cows is, I mean, in the first, month of lactation, right? So the key thing there is keep down the infection rate at that stage, you know. So we have to look across the board at everywhere on antibiotics.
Okay, and when you say critically,
we've learned a lot, Tommy, from COVID. We've learned the vaccination, how well it has worked. That'll reduce antibiotics, boost the immunity, get the nutrition right. I mean, get the stocking rate right. So it's a case of looking at all aspects of the farm, do you know what I mean, to get it right.
Yeah, and when you say critically important antibiotics, sometimes when we talk about some of these challenges, Dorian, they can seem a million miles away. But when we talk about critically important antibiotics, these are when you go into hospital yourself and you might be treated for an infection, or someone you love is treated for an infection. These are the last line of defense in human medicine, and they're precious resources. So it's in the good of everyone. So, okay, good points. I think maybe, look, there's been lots of stuff discussed there. It's 9:10, and I know we've all been sustained within an inch of our life, and sustainability, we hear it at every single webinar, but it is the big challenge of the next number of decades. And I suppose one of the things I'll always say to farmers is, yeah, look, there's not a negative commentary out there, but we're doing so much on the ground in relation to research, change and evolution of what we're doing, and we're always trying to get better, and we have to get better. Just, I suppose, maybe to Joe, and I'll come to Doreen as well on this one. The milk recording, its role in the sustainability story, Joe, your perspective.
Again, this report doesn't exist without milk recording. The ability to select cows for whether it's antibiotic or for selective breeding doesn't really exist without milk recording. The capacity to manage cell count properly doesn't exist without milk recording. You know, while we like to manage a herd at a herd level, every herd is a collection of individuals as well. And as we've seen from the reports, and anyone that's got the reports, Tommy, the individual variation that's there is huge. And I like what Rosario said earlier, trying to get the middle group in any herd up. The gap between the middle and top 20%, closing that gap is important. But how do we do that without knowing what the individual performance actually is? So I don't know, maybe there's some people might have a hang up on milk recording. It seems like another task and another job to be done. And anyone that has done the job and sees a sampling error or a drainage problem on a meter or something, you know, sometimes you want to just take the meter and throw it out of the pit or whatever, but sometimes you have to work through those issues, because the value of what you get at the end over time outweighs the frustration that you get a few mornings a year. So I think it'll be good. It's a very good initiative to take, I think, and I think we just have to we just need to get more people using the data when to do use it as well. So it's going to be a critically important thing over the next. It is already, but even more so into the future, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Doreen, carbon sustainability.
Sure, Tommy. I mean, the whole carbon story is all about efficiency. So I mean, and for herd donors to go milk recording, if a herd donor has milk recorded, there is the amount of help out there. So I mean, from us in Munster Bovine, we'll sit down, we'll go through to one-to-one. Their vet is happy to go through with them. Their Teagasc advisor is happy to go through with them. So if you have the data, someone will sit down and actually go through with you. And the other thing is, you need only really focus on it twice in the year. Breeding, what cows am I breeding my replacements from? And at the back end, what cows do I retain and what treatment do I put on them for the dry cow period to ensure, do you know what I mean, that they'll actually get a cure over the dry period. So there's only a couple of times a year when you use it, but the key times is breeding and actually it drying off.
Okay, well, I thank you all because I used to have analysis paralysis when I was looking at these milk recordings. You've made my life a little bit easier anyway, certainly going on to farm, and I've seen it on farm firsthand as well. Okay, on that note, I certainly think we've had a good discussion. Again, this panel discussion and the presentations will be available. I'd like to thank all the presenters and the panelists for their contributions this evening. Lots of passion, lots of energy there this evening. That's what we need in Irish agriculture, plenty of people with that attitude. So, okay, I'll leave the last words now to Mary O'Keefe, Herd Management Manager with Munster Bovine, and she'll sign off. So, good evening to everybody and enjoy the next couple of days of fine weather.
Thanks very much, Tommy. So I'd like to just finish up by saying a huge thank you to everyone who helped organise this and took part in this event tonight. I'd also like to thank the herd owners and the Munster Bovine team and our stakeholders for all their help along the way. And if you have any further questions, just give the office a call or you can email your query to info@munsterbovine.ie. And as Tommy mentioned earlier, this webinar has been recorded, so we will be sending a link out shortly to everybody that has signed up for the event. So, and also if you want more help with your report, what we will be organising in the autumn is a one-to-one workshop in your local store with a Munster Bovine rep. So you can attend that meeting and the rep will go through your report with you again. So that's it from us. And thank you very much for joining. I hope you enjoyed the event.
Thank you.